This particular recipe has a thicker batter than most, and then you whip it up into a meringue and then add your butter. I have been drying fruit all week long. I always save the tiniest little offcuts of paper. Hello, good morning, and welcome back to the vlog. Today we're going to do a one-day holiday extravaganza vlog. I have so many things I need to get done before Christmas. The late Thanksgiving has thrown off my schedule, and I keep forgetting how quickly Christmas is coming. I need to bake macarons and cookies, I need to wrap gifts, and I'm going to be making some DIY simmer pot jars that I'll gift to friends, so I'll show you how I'm going to make those. I have been prepping things for them all week long, so I'm excited to finally assemble them. And I will share with you how I made all of the ingredients. First up is macarons. So I've made these a few times. I think I have a vlog back like almost a year ago now that I showed you kind of how I made them. But this time around, I'm going to do some more festive macarons, and I'm going to attempt to make a brown sugar Swiss meringue buttercream. I usually default to vanilla because the shells are so hard that I spend all my time making the shells, and I just keep it easy for the filling. But since I've kind of mastered the shells, fingers crossed, it's time to explore a new filling. The recipe I'm going to use, as always, is by White Whisk, and I will include it in the description below. It is the one recipe I have finally had success with every single time I make it, and if you have ever made macarons before and you know how tricky they are, you know that the tiniest little thing can totally throw the recipe off. So finding a recipe that I can be consistent with was key. I got different sprinkles yesterday from Michael's, and they had these really cute mixed packs, but then of course in my head I was like, oh, I can do that. I'll get all these individual colors and make them. Honestly, it was probably the same price, but I liked that these were a little more classic and that they had, different shapes for each. So this is a sugar crystal. These are traditional sprinkles. These are little pearls, and these are flat sort of discs. So blended together, I think they'll make a fun little mix. I prepped all of my equipment this morning, so before I start making anything, I wipe everything I'm using down very lightly with white vinegar, and that just ensures I'm removing anything like butter or fat that could throw off the recipe. Something as simple as that can make these go sideways, so I always like to do a lot of prep work. I use these little silicone templates so I know how big to pipe the shells. I have 2 of those set up. I've also wiped out my metal bowls. This one is for the KitchenAid mixer, and this is just a regular old bowl that I use to mix some of the dry ingredients that I will pour into the big bowl when we're mixing everything up. I've also tried a million different almond flours. Literally every brand I can find I have tried, because I always thought maybe that was the reason that these were going sideways in the past. Kirkland brand almond flour is highly recommended in so many blogs, and it truly is the best. So if you are into this, get Kirkland. It's worth a $60 Costco membership just for this flour. One of the key pieces is having a little scale, so this is great for measuring all your egg whites and sugar and flour, because if anything is slightly off in this recipe, it can really throw off the success of your shells. So I've got all of that set up. I'm going to make a double batch, so I have lots of these. These can also be frozen, so I'm going to give that a go. I've never frozen them before, but I want to try freezing half the shells and see if that works. Because it's such a big effort to make them, it's nice to be able to make them in big batches and then save some for later. First up is the confectioner sugar and almond flour, and it's 200 grams of each. I've made sure my scale is in grams so I can measure appropriately, and I have my little handheld strainer here that I use to sift the flour and make sure there's no chunks in it. Alright, got all of the powdered sugar in there, but of course my scale just randomly turned off, so I think I got the measurement right, but we will find out. Now I just whisk both together. This just helps make sure everything is evenly mixed once we add it to the wet ingredients. Now we are going to measure out 130 grams of egg whites, so we need to separate the yolk from the white, and then I will save the yolks for something else. Usually it's about 4 eggs, and in this case it was exactly. I just didn't pour all of the last egg white in here to keep it at that amount. So I add the egg whites to my mixing bowl. So this is what we're going to stick on the mixer. I'm also going to add the granulated sugar to this bowl, and that will be 120 grams. Before I whip up the meringue with the egg whites and granulated sugar, I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of cream of tartar. Now we can whip this up. So I've put the whisk attachment on the KitchenAid, and the recipe actually gives me times and speeds. So I'm just going to follow the recipe until we get to stiff peaks. Once we've whipped up our meringue, we need to check for stiff peaks. And what that means is if I take my whisk and I dunk it in the mixture here and I pull it up, oops. When I flip it upside down, do those little tips at the top flip over and sort of dribble down, or do they kind of stay upright? So this means it's nice and stiff and we're ready to add our dry ingredients. Now, if I were coloring the shells, I would have added gel food coloring about halfway through mixing up the meringue, but I think I'm going to leave them white so that the color of the sprinkles and the frosting kind of like pop. It's really important that you don't add too much liquid, which is why gel food coloring is typically advised, because any amount of extra liquid in the recipe can cause the shells to go sideways. With the meringue ready, now we can add our dry ingredients, and we do that little by little, and I mix it by hand. You certainly could use the KitchenAid if you kind of know what you're looking for, you've done this many times, and you're really paying attention to it. But I find I have more control over the consistency of this when I mix it by hand. And a lot of recipes actually include the number of folds to do, so you can count, and that way you can have a very precise recipe every single time. The technique for folding is wrapping your spatula all the way around the outside of the bowl and then pulling through the middle, so that counts as one. So you'll see me do this all the way around the outside, pull through the middle, and I'm going to add half of the dry mixture and do 15 folds. We'll kind of see where things are at, and then we will add the rest of the mixture and continue folding that in. To check and make sure your batter is ready, you basically want to kind of scrape everything into a pile in the bottom and then just like lightly shake the bowl and see if those lines start to kind of disappear and it settles back into like a solid mixture. This particular recipe has a thicker batter than most. A lot of times with the macaron batter, you kind of make like a figure 8 with the dribbling batter and see if that settles into the mixture, but this is just a little bit thicker, so it won't do that. To fill the piping bag, I use a tall glass. I've already got my tip on the bag, so I just twist it here at the bottom, so as I fill it, things don't leak out the tip. I stick that in the bottom of the glass, and then I just pull the sides over so that we have a nice big opening to pour into and it doesn't make a mess. Depending on the size of your piping bag, you'll probably have extra, so I'm going to do this in 2 batches. And it's really important not to overfill the bag because once you close it up, it'll start like spilling out the top. So I try to be conscious of that and, you know, err on the side of less is more. Next up is piping, which is literally my favorite part. I'm just going to use these circles as my template, and you don't want to squeeze too much on because they will fill out a little bit. So I try to pipe just shy of that outer ring, and then when we like smack the tray to get all the air bubbles out and it starts to spread, they aren't touching. The last step before I let these sit to develop a skin, before we put them in the oven, is to wrap the tray on the counter to get rid of all of the air bubbles. It's very loud and kind of annoying, but you'll start to see bubbles pop to the surface and the shells will kind of start to like flatten a little bit. If there are any stubborn ones or you want to kind of smooth out these little nipples, that's from like when I piped and I had that little tip on the top, you can just use a Q-tip to kind of smooth it over and then wrap it a few more times to make sure that settles. There are many important steps when making macarons, but one of the most important ones is letting these sit after you've piped them and wrapped them so that they can develop a skin. That's what helps when they expand in the oven, create that ruffled little foot. So I'm gonna let these sit for like 25-30 minutes and then I'll just lightly touch the tops of them, and if nothing comes off on my finger and it's totally like smooth, then they should be ready to put in the oven. If they're still a little sticky, I'll keep letting them sit. The time of year really impacts how long these need to sit. Like sometimes in the summer when it's more humid and like moist in the air, these have to sit a lot longer. So it's important to just check them yourself and not rely solely on time. Before these get too dry, I'm going to add sprinkles. So I was initially thinking I would do different colored macarons and do like one solid colored sprinkle, but I think what I'm going to do is mix these in a bowl so that we have kind of a multicolored sprinkle mix, and then I'll just add that to all of these. Now I am preheating the oven, and the reason I didn't do that earlier is because it takes quite a long time to prep the batter and pipe everything, and then you have to let them sit, so there's no sense having the oven on that whole time. It is very important to have an oven thermometer because the temperature needs to be super accurate, and if it's not, it could throw off your bake. So this particular recipe calls for 295 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to heat it up to 295 according to the dial, but once it's warmed up, I'll check my thermometer and adjust accordingly so that the inside temperature is actually reading that. While the macarons cook, I'm going to move on to the Swiss meringue buttercream. This is going to be my first time ever trying this recipe. I'm making a brown sugar Swiss meringue buttercream. I think the only difference really is that we're swapping out the regular white sugar for the brown sugar. It just gives it more of a richer flavor, a little bit of a caramel kind of undertone. So we'll see how it turns out. The difference between this and a traditional buttercream is that you heat the egg whites and sugar over a double boiler, and then you whip it up into a meringue and then add your butter. I don't actually have a double boiler, but you can do this with a big enough pot and just like your KitchenAid bowl or a regular old stainless steel bowl. You just want to make sure the bottom of the bowl doesn't touch the water in the pot you're boiling. So I'm only boiling about like an inch of water in the bottom, and then once that comes to a boil, I will set this on top and continuously whisk it until everything is dissolved and it comes up to temperature. I have a little thermometer here that I'll stick in to check once everything is dissolved. It doesn't get too hot, so you can actually kind of touch it yourself and just make sure there's no granules between your fingers, but the thermometer is a good way to know for sure. Okay, so we had a little bit of an accident. I was trying to take the camera off the tripod to show you the melted sugar and egg whites, and I dropped the entire camera into the bowl and submerged the camera with the exception of the lens. So that's awesome. So the good news is the frosting is complete. I was able to whip the egg whites and sugar into a meringue, and then I added 1 cup of butter, half a cup of salted, half cup unsalted, just so it wasn't too salty. Once it was whipped up, it was pretty soft, so I put the whole bowl in the fridge to just like solidify a little bit. That way when we pipe it onto the shells, it doesn't just like melt off. While that was mixing up, I was frantically cleaning this camera. I think I did okay. I started to film again and then I tested the audio and you couldn't hear what I was saying. So I used an air compressor to blow the mic and I'm hoping it's better now. This is just a lesson to A, slow down, B, use two hands, and C, probably get some sort of a backup camera. Because if this one dies, the only backup I really have right now is my phone, which would do in a pinch. So this now means that my evening is going to be spent with a Q-tip and probably some form of like rubbing alcohol or something and a tiny screwdriver disassembling little parts of my camera and trying to clean it as best I can. But we will forge on for now because I still have a ton of baking to do. I need to make lunch. I've got DIY simmer pot jars to make. We have things to do. This is the first batch of cooked macaron shells. So you can see we have these little feet, so that's where it rose, and that's why it's important to have that shell very dry when you put it in the oven, because then that stays intact and it just sort of like lifts off of the bottom. But I think the oven was just a smidge too warm, like a few degrees, so putting it in for 18 minutes actually kind of like overdid them. And then these ones I put in for 15 minutes and they seemed to be okay. So when I make my second batch, I think I'm going to do them for less time and just keep an eye on them, because if you can see with them side by side, these just look a little more like toasted and these are closer to like an ivory white. Before I go ahead and fill everything, I'm going to try to match shells up that are close in size. Sometimes like a few of them are quite a bit larger, so I try to match them up before I fill them so that one side of the cookie isn't wonky. I filled my piping bag up. I took the frosting out of the fridge. It's still a little bit soft, but I'm basically going to fill these and then put them right in a Tupperware and put them back in the fridge to harden up. They're a little bit wonky, but festive nonetheless. So now that they're all filled, I put them in airtight containers, and you want to allow them to mature in the refrigerator for at least 24 hours. That just helps them develop their final texture and flavor. I'm going to make some lunch. I call it a veggie slamwich. I don't know if anyone else has come up with that brilliant term, but it's like a slam dunk sandwich. So it's just toasted bread with mayo, literally any veggies you have in your fridge, cucumbers, tomatoes, pepperoncinis, hot peppers, regular peppers, pickles, mustard, sprouts, lettuce, literally whatever you've got. And cheese. Don't forget cheese. That's honestly the most important part. So I'm going to make one of those up and enjoy that for a bit. Then I'm going to make another batch of macaron shells. I'm not going to fill those. I will freeze the shells unfilled. That way I just have a stock in the freezer, so whenever I need a quick baked good, I can just pull out the shells I need, fill them with any leftover frosting I will freeze, and then they're good to go. Once I finish all of that, we will meet back up and work on the simmer pot jars. These are all of my ingredients to make some DIY simmer pot jars. If you don't know, a simmer pot is just like a fragrant pot of boiling water on your stove that just kind of like makes the house smell good. You can throw all kinds of different things into the pot depending on the season and what you want it to smell like, but my favorite time of year to do it is around the holidays because you can get those like spicy, sweet, like citrusy smells in the air, and it really is just super pleasant. If I'm doing this myself at home, I just use fresh fruit and slice up what I have in the fridge and throw it into a pot of boiling water. But if you're gifting these, it's likely that they might be sitting around for a few weeks or someone might not use it right away. So you want to use dried fruit so it doesn't get moldy. I have been drying fruit all week long. So these are dried oranges. I've got dried lemons here. These are dried pears. And then I purchased some dried cranberries. I've got cinnamon sticks. Thankfully they sell them in a big container, so I will add one, maybe two of these depending on how many I have to each jar. And then I got a jar of cloves. Dehydrating fruit is really easy to do. You just set your oven to a really low temperature and you put a whole bunch of slices on a sheet of parchment paper and just let them slowly dry out. The key is slow and low. You don't want to cook these. You're just trying to let the moisture evaporate. And once they're dried out, then they can sit in a jar or in a bag like this for much longer, and they won't go bad like fresh fruit slices would. I will include a link to the instructions that I used to dry this out. On average, it took about 6 or 7 hours for each set of cookie sheets. Then I would pull them all off, put fresh slices down, and stick it back in the oven. Now that I have all this stuff prepped, I'm basically just going to create an assembly line and fill these 8-ounce jars. I ended up getting a container of the 8-ounce quilted crystal jars and then a container of the plain old regular 8-ounce jars because they didn't have 2 of the quilted. I picked these up at Ace Hardware and used coupons, but you can also find them at Target, and I will include links to those as well. Once I have all of the jars filled, then I will design a little tag that just has some instructions. I will print those, cut them out, and tie them around the lids, and then these will be good to gift. I forgot I actually had some rosemary in the fridge, and I think this would be nice to add to the jars. So I'm just going to cut this into slightly smaller pieces, and then I'll stick this tray in the oven on 200 until this totally dries out, and then I can put some dried bits in the jars too. I just put together this tag in Illustrator, and then I put multiple on a sheet so I could print it out on just a standard 8.5 by 11 sheet. Now I'm going to use my little cutter here to slice these up into individual tags. I've got a hole punch that I'll punch on the left side, and then I'll use this red raffia ribbon that I got at IKEA a few weeks ago to tie it around the jar lids. I actually tied it around the top edge of the lid so it didn't slide down the jar because there's a little lip edge there. I'm going to untie this one and just use this as a measurement to cut a whole bunch of ties, and then I will loop the tag through and tie them all on. I am really happy with how all of these came out. I think the little red tie and the small tag worked perfectly. I unscrewed all of the lids once I finished the tags and put the dried rosemary in, so now you can see a little sprig down the side, which is a fun pop of like a dark green. So I can now check these off my list. I'm going to pause and warm up some leftovers for dinner, and then I'm going to migrate into the sitting room with all of my wrapping things, put on a Christmas movie, and wrap some gifts. We are down to our last task for the day. I need to wrap the gifts I have received in the mail so far. I'm just using leftover paper from the past few years. All of the paper I usually get is from Target. They always just have like a nice color scheme, so I don't even have to think about it, and it's not overly expensive. I love beautifully wrapped gifts, but I can't for the life of me see past like spending so much money on wrapping that just gets torn off, which I know sounds crazy because once upon a time I was a stationer and I did all kinds of things with paper goods, but I'm just too practical of a person to spend a lot of money on it. So if you're looking for good wrapping paper, check out Target. They usually sell the brand Sugar Paper and maybe have like 5 to 7 different designs that all kind of like work together. And the last few years, oddly enough, all of those patterns have kind of worked together over the years. So my miscellaneous collection is kind of in this like red, green, teal, gold, white, pink theme. So it's kind of cute. My mother-in-law is the queen of gift tags, and I used to literally never use them, but she got me onto them, and I always get these at Home Goods. They're super cheap, like a few dollars for a pack, and they'll come in like sticker sheets like this. I also have like some cute little gift tags that have a to and from on the back, or I've got these little like rolls of stickers, so they're just like 4 or 5 different designs on each roll, and you can just stick them on the gift and write the to and from names. So that helps a lot. Aside from that, I do keep it pretty simple. I probably won't do bows this year. I don't know how much ribbon I have left in my stash, so in the spirit of working with what I've got, we'll just stick with paper and tags. I always save the tiniest little offcuts of paper just in case I have small gifts like this guy. Tiny little box, don't need a lot of paper, and that way I don't have to cut something off of one of the big rolls. I have burned through nearly every single new Christmas movie that's come out this year, so I decided I'm going to try a new TV show called Man on the Inside. It's on Netflix. It looks like there's about 8 episodes, so I'm gonna give that a go while I wrap. I'm not going to show you what I'm wrapping because that would spoil it for friends and family who are watching this vlog, but I will show you everything once it's all wrapped because it's fun to see all the pretty paper together. Okay, first pile of gifts is all wrapped and ready to go. Some of them need to be shipped, which I am running out of time for. If you are also shipping gifts that you need to get to people before Christmas, I think the last date for like regular USPS shipping is December 18th. So reminder, get your packages out. This show is just pulling at my heartstrings. It is so sweet and sad and wholesome and funny. It's like all of the things. Highly recommend if you are looking for something new, but be forewarned, you might shed a tear or two. I'm going to head up, get ready for bed, and watch one more episode before I go to sleep. Thank you so much for watching and joining me for a festive holiday prep day. If you liked the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future updates, and I will catch up with you in the next vlog.